There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, "Fool me once, shame on you." You fool me, we can't get fooled again.
The Matrix is a system, Neo. That system is our enemy. When you're inside, you look around. What do you see? Businessmen, teachers, lawyers, carpenters. The very minds of the people we are trying to save. Until we do, these people are still part of that system. That makes them our enemy. You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged. And many of them are so inert, so hopelessly dependent on the system, that they will fight to protect it. Are you listening to me, Leo? Are you listening? Are you listening? Are you listening?
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning. Expression. Or sound.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference
Nuance.
in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A subtle difference in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A subtle difference in or shade of meaning.
Nuance.
Expression or sound.
Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning, expression, or sound.
And welcome to Nuance. I'm your host, the Doctor of Nuance, Michael Wood Jr. The purpose of this program is to not be so confident about our conclusions, because life is a process of figuring out what is not true and avoiding those things. We do not have the tools to figure out how reality is, only how to operate from our limited perspective. I cannot stand the narratives that control our lives. Every story and hot topic is a distraction. You were educated and raised in a culture that sees you as a means to an ends of the elites. You are programmed to be a factory working, non thinking robot. So let's do our best part to bust that up together. Here we explore a 2018 article titled "The Growing Concerns Concerning." Oh, hold on. You know what? We got to talk about this hair. Anybody out there is wondering just what is up with this awesome hair that I have going on. I'm working on a wicked mohawk for the Slipknot concert. And so when that time comes, it will all pay off. I'm sure of it. So here we're looking at a 2018 article titled "The Growing Concerns Regarding School Resource Officers" by Joseph B. Ryan, Antonis, can't even believe I'm going to try this, Katsianis, that's definitely wrong, Jennifer Counts, and Jill Shelnut. This article is published in Intervention School and Clinic. Intervention School and Clinic is a peer-reviewed academic journal that publishes paper in the field of education and has been in publication since 1965. Currently, it is published by Sage Publications in association with Texas-based 501c3 Hamel Institute on Disabilities. According to their website, the mission of the Hamilton Institute on Disabilities is to advance and improve the education and treatment of individuals with disabilities and other special needs by developing and disseminating educational and scientific journals, reference books, textbooks, and educational materials, and diagnostic tests and other assessments. No conflicts of interest came up from my search, so I think we can pretty much rely on this in general for now. We will see. So the abstract is that, so this is let's go over the abstract real quick. So there have been an increasing number of incidents in which school resource officers have been used to manage student disciplinary issues with disastrous results. Court cases brought by parents and advocacy groups claim SROs have traumatized and injured students. This article addresses several critical issues concerning SROs being used to manage student misbehavior, lack of training, lack of policies regulating roles and responsibilities, and inadvertently promoting a school-to-prison pipeline. The authors provide recommendations and best practices for future use. It's a rather short article for scientific literature, as it is just a qualitative analysis of existing data. As I began to summarize it, I realized there was so much relevant data that I simply realized that I just needed to read the whole thing. So that is what we'll do. As soon as we come back right after this commercial, we'll go ahead and read this article, and hope you enjoy and learn something from it. Awesome. Thank you.
Like most cops, the emotions felt when pinning the badge on my uniform for the first time was a source of immense pride, but also a shocking reality to the complication of performing a duty under the weight of such power and responsibility.
As you can see,
the callousness of veterans cops and the braggadocious masculinity of the streets are immature expressions of the generations of trauma enacted on our brothers and sisters from a system oppressing us all. My internal fights with policing, whistleblowing, scholarly endeavors, reform efforts, and politics have failed in exhausting fashion.
And what I'm trying to say is that we are looking at people who are doing nothing new. And if we focus on the actions, then we can fix the things for next time. Because when you focus on people, we end up thinking we can chop the head off. They put a new person in and something will change. But if we don't focus on the methodologies and the institutions, then we will be totally missing
somebody, put them in a prison cell, do the paperwork, go back out and do it again. So what we really need is to change the incentives and disincentives so that no matter what the role, we're still going towards that objective that actually serves you.
More occupation, more vehicles, if your answer continues to be violent, because we have to understand that everything about policing is inherently violent. I have come in there with authority and told you what you will do.
I believe one of the reasons behind my struggles is that I had not laid out a consistent and intertwined philosophy of what in the hell I was trying to say. For the philosophical foundations of crime and punishment to be ushered into the 21st century, a reimagination of our institutions is necessary. Building off the famous works of Cesar Beccaria, I construct those pathways to the Enlightenment period of justice. Free will, sanctuary cities, gun control, eyewitness testimony, incarceration, and more must all work together for a prosperous society. Learning these lessons has been a brutal journey for me, and it is unlikely to be an easy one for you, but it is one that we owe to the future, to make a safer world for our children to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century by yours truly, Michael Wood, is most conveniently ordered from the evil empire Amazon, because we are in that 21st century after all. For the enhanced and expanded audiobook, check out Audible. In the meantime, the philosophical half of Crime and Punishments, all 40-some chapters and then some, is being presented as a free podcast from iMember Media at imembermedia.com and will be available on all major platforms and direct from the publisher. Pause the video or see the links in the notes and prepare for the challenge and adventure of self-critical thought.
And welcome back. So here we go. The growing concerns regarding school resource officers. During the past year, the media has exposed a rash of incidents concerning school resource officers, otherwise known as SROs. using excessive force to manage student misbehavior. Among the most disturbing cases receiving national media attention included those in Kenton County, Kentucky, where an SRO handcuffed two elementary students ages 8 and 9 above the elbows on multiple occasions for noncompliance, in Richland County, South Carolina, where a high school girl who was seated in her desk was physically assaulted by an SRO for being noncompliant and refusing to give up her cell phone. Incidents such as these have left many parents and advocacy agencies questioning if the presence of law enforcement in school buildings has actually made children safer or merely placed them at an increased risk of injury and criminal prosecution. The permanent placement of law enforcement within schools originated more than half a century ago during the 1950s in Flint, Michigan, with the belief that a police presence would help decrease school violence, particularly gun-related incidences. Since their inception, school law enforcement officers, more commonly referred to today as school resource officers, experienced a significant degree of mission creep, a gradual expansion of the original goals and intent of the position. In the case of SROs, the original intent of helping create a safer school climate has been expanded in many districts to encompass discipline and enforcement of school policy. This expansion is in part due to a lack of precision or clear policy guidelines for defining their roles. The disparity of court decisions surrounding the role of police in schools and the extent of police powers, especially with regard to the blurring of lines between duties of administration and those of law enforcement, gives further evidence to the lack of clarity surrounding SRO programs at every level from policy to implementation. According to a 2005 study prepared for the National Institute of Justice, a frequent mistake made by SRO programs is that they lack a detailed written definition of the roles and responsibilities to guide officers in their duties and govern school administrations in the use of SROs. The changing mission of SROs has often been reactionary to public outcry of a perceived threat to our nation's youth. During the 60s and 70s, SROs were placed in schools in many southern states to help address issues related to racial tensions. Shortly thereafter, SROs were tasked with deterring drug-related problems across the nation. In more recent years, there has been a huge growth in SROs in the wake of mass school shooting tragedies such as Columbine and Sandy Hook. As a result of these societal fears, the presence of law enforcement officers within schools has expanded exponentially over the past several decades. According to the National Association of School Resource Officers, school-based policing has become one of the fastest growing areas of law enforcement, with nearly half of all public schools having a police presence. Today, there are approximately 19,000 SROs working in schools across the country. The Safe and Drug-Free School Zones and Communities Act established SROs to help educate students in crime and illegal drug use, prevention, and safety, develop community justice initiative for students, and train students in conflict resolution, restorative justice, and crime and illegal drug use awareness. The NASRO, that group, defines the role of SROs as threefold, including law enforcement, teaching, and mentoring. Which, side note, we need to mention, have very poor training in law enforcement, no training in teaching, and no education in mentoring. First and foremost, SROs are police officers responsible for the protection of life and property through the enforcement of laws and ordinances. Beyond that, SROs also serve as teachers in a host of programs such as DARE, GREAT, the gang resistance and drug use ones, and alcohol awareness prevention and DUI prevention. In addition, SROs serve as mentors to students as well as advisors to the educators and administrators who work with them. As such, SROs are available for both formal and informal guidance. They also work closely with educators on attendance issues and counselors who work within schools and community to help build working relationships. According to statistics released by the Justice Policy Institute, nearly half of an SRO's contracted time is spent dealing with matters of law enforcement. A quarter is spent advising and mentoring, and 12% is devoted to teaching, and 16% performing various other duties. The controversies. While an increased number of schools have embraced the use of SROs to address school safety issues ranging from drugs to weapons, Their presence has not been without controversy. This column addresses several issues related to the use of law enforcement in schools, including SROs being used to manage student behavior, inadvertently promoting the school to prison pipeline, lack of training, and lack of policies regulating roles and responsibilities, as well as recommendations for best practices. Managing student misbehavior. A common complaint among many educators and administrators has been the increased level of challenging behaviors that they face from students, ranging from noncompliance to dangerous behaviors. These behaviors interfere with students' learning, disrupt the instructional environment, and pose threats to the safety and well-being of students and educators alike. A recent survey by the National Center for Education Statistics reported that 41% of public school teachers claim student misbehavior interfering with their teaching. This is not overly surprising, given the NCES also found that practically the same number, 43%, of schools reported inadequate level of teacher training in behavior management. Educational researchers have long cautioned that the combination of ineffective educational programming, such as failure to provide appropriate curricular instruction, and a lack of appropriate behavioral interventions can exacerbate student problems, leading to a vicious cycle of antecedents that set the stage for problem behavior. The increased level of misbehavior, coupled with a lack of professional training and positive behavioral interventions, have resulted in many schools becoming overly reliant on increasingly harsh and often aversive behavioral interventions for dealing with challenging student behavior, including the use of suspension, seclusion, and restraint. An unfortunate consequence of tasking SROs to deal with student misbehavior has increasingly criminalized traditional school disciplinary issues and exacerbated the school to prison pipeline. Shouldn't use exacerbated that close twice, but anyway. This claim appears to be sustained by the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, which found over the course of a recent academic school year, more than 260,000 students were referred to law enforcement, 92,000 students were arrested, 70,000 were physically assaulted, and 70,000 were physically restrained, and 37,000 students were placed in seclusion. Regrettably, the students most commonly impacted by these harsh and intrusive interventions were disproportionately minorities from low socioeconomic statuses. The school to prison pipeline. Although the original intent of SROs was to create a safer school environment, an unintended effect of placing law enforcement within schools has been increased opportunities for negative interactions between youth and police. This has resulted in an increase in youth being referred to the juvenile justice system for assault, weapons, and drug offenses. A report from the Justice Policy Institute showed that schools with SROs had 5 times as many arrests for disorderly conduct as schools without SROs. According to Flannery, in an article for NEA Today, more than 250,000 students were referred to police officers to receive legal consequences in 2010 for offenses that once would have, in years past, simply earned them a stern talking to by school personnel. The statement of interest in 2015 acknowledged that school to prison pipeline theory in a letter of interest describing the involvement of law enforcement in the application of harsh school discipline, which can prove to be discriminatory, especially to students with disabilities. The U.S. Department of Justice cautions that SROs are more likely to criminalize minor school infractions and push students unnecessarily into the prison to school pipeline. Such practices force students out of school and into the juvenile justice system. In 2013, the 2013 Strategies for Youth survey found that the single offense in juvenile justice that has not been reduced over the past 30 years in public order offenses. Public order offenses include offenses such as disorderly conduct or obstruction of justice, which have increased by 108% from 1985 to 2009. Side note here, this is a common error that you're always going to see in criminal justice, talking about disorderly conduct or crimes or anything like this. This is what is reported, not what actually takes place. So, they're saying this has increased, and I know that they're saying according to these people, but this is kind of misleading. Again, the populations most adversely affected by this trend are students of color and those with disabilities. Fabiello et al. Reported that nearly half of students with emotional disturbance and 24% of students with learning disabilities had contact with the juvenile justice system, in comparison to 13% of non-identified students. Identified students. It's going to be a recurring theme with this in identity politics in science. Civil rights data collection from 2014 showed that while Black students make up only 16% of the overall population, they represented 27% of students referred to law enforcement and 31% of students arrested at school. Comparable findings of disproportionality have been reported by researchers across the United States. Lack of training. Currently, there are no national standards outlining training requirements for SROs, and only a handful of states have established specific training certification requirements for these specialized officers. The need for a more systemic approach to training SROs is a major factor in increasing their effectiveness as a solution to school safety issues. Unfortunately, a 2011 survey by the International Association of Chiefs of Police found that 3/4, 76% of respondent states do not mandate juvenile justice training for law enforcement beyond the basic training received at police academy. This is disheartening given the state police academies reported that they spend less than 1% of total training hours on juvenile justice issues. Further, the curriculum in the majority, 40, so there's also no evidence that it would take more than 1% of the total training. Its percentage and its inefficiency or inadequacy are not correlated. Further, the curriculum in the majority, 40, of states had a central focus on juvenile justice code and legal issues rather than behavior management, child development, communication techniques, issues for minority populations, factors for disabled use, or other recommended topics specifically related to working with juveniles. This lack of training is especially problematic when SROs interact with students with disabilities, especially those with emotional and behavior disorders who have specific behavioral interaction plans that schools are required to comply with to optimize their educational success. That they would optimize their educational success, also not evidence, but yes, they do have IEPs in which students have to be tracked when they have special needs. According to a 2001 International Association of Police Chiefs of Police survey, almost 3/4 of SRO training is provided by outside agencies. Strategies for Youth, a national policy and training organization working to support effective policing in communities, recommends training that focuses on providing information that promotes positive interactions and decreases conflict by teaching about brain structure and child development, including capacity of youth to make decisions. The NASRO program, a 40-hour block of instruction for SROs, which includes law enforcement concepts, ethics, diversity, and child development concepts, and trends in juvenile justice, as well as teaching and informational counsel strategies. Some exemplary state programs, as well as additional information, can be found on the Safe Supportive Learning Government website. It's really rough when they talk about 40-hour blocks of instruction for SROs. You talk about inadequate training and then mention a 40-hour block, which is, what's a 40-hour block going to do? Establish policies regulating duties and responsibilities. Currently, SROs are guided by varying regulations according to each state. However, community-oriented policing services encourages law enforcement agencies and schools to adopt a memorandum of understanding to clearly document the roles, expectations, and responsibilities of all individuals involved for the purposes of maintaining and increasing safety in schools and communities. Several well-established and model MRUs are shown in this report. An MOU can help schools avoid the inappropriate use of SROs by clarifying the conditions under which law enforcement can intervene with the student and the level of force permissible. According to the Council of State Governments, which is really weird, we have the idea that the school, each individual school, would then have their own armed enforcement wing that they regulate what is legal and illegal. It's like a minor, it's like, or a small little dictatorship there. We make the already cities, the mayors have their personal army pretty much codified in their police agencies, but the idea to do it with each school, and then often with different housing complexes with special police and things like that, I think we're getting into a little bit of craziness. All right, let's continue on. According to the Council of State Governments Justice Center, as of September 13th, 29 states have statutes that require SROs or school police to be sworn police officers or certified law enforcement officers, which of course the others don't. Further, in 2013, at least 29 states introduced more than 90 bills regarding SROs as of September 2013. 17 of these bills became law. In Alabama, qualified SROs are allowed to carry a weapon while on duty, and retired police officers may serve as part-time SROs. Connecticut law provides for training of SROs regarding children's mental, social, and emotional and behavioral health needs. The cost of SROs in Tennessee is a law enforcement responsibility. A Virginia law authorizes an appropriations combined with federal funds for the school resource officer incentives grant. Relevant litigation also provides guidance regarding the contact of SROs. For example, Freeman v. Gore in 2007 provides law enforcement officers the authority to use force to accomplish lawful objectives such as detention and arrest. However, the level of permissible force that can be used was established through the Supreme Court ruling in Graham v. Connor. The Graham v. Connor case established a three-pronged test that mandates law enforcement officers take into account the severity of the crime committed, the level of the threat to the public safety officer, and the level of resistance. Now, this remains true to some, this is a side note, this remains true to a certain effect, but what we have now established is that this concept has grown because of Part B, the level of threat to safety in the public or officer is now determined not by what the typical citizen or the common man or the, however we say it, a jury of your peers, as in citizens, determines. It is now determined by what the typical police officer thinks is a reasonable use of force. So I talked about that a lot before, but that's why we're completely lost now, because that is just an illogical loop. All right, so summary and recommendations. Whereas the original intent of SROs was to create a safer environment, some unintended consequences of placing law enforcement in schools have been greater opportunities for negative interactions between youth and police, an increase in youth being referred to juvenile justice system for assault, weapons, and drug offenses, as highlighted by the U.S. Department of Justice. A poorly implemented SRO program can exacerbate the school-to-prison pipeline, resulting in significant harm to students' educational outcomes. The absence of sufficient training and clear policies to limit SRO's roles and responsibilities has resulted in continued mission creep. To ensure SROs are used effectively, schools should consider the following: not to use SROs to manage student misbehavior unless criminal in nature, increase SRO training to include behavior management, child development communication techniques, and disability awareness, or establish an MOU to delineate specific roles and responsibilities for SROs and include the SRO as a team member of the school-wide positive behavioral support team to enhance safe school planning efforts. While SROs perform an important role in our nation's schools, and not SRO. What? While SROs perform an important role in our nation's schools, it is critical that educators and not SROs be responsible for student behavior and discipline. The SRO should not criminalize behavior that school officials properly handle. This stance was reiterated by a recent position statement released by the NASRO, which states SROs should be prohibited from becoming involved in formal school discipline situations that fall under the responsibility of school administrators. The authors declared no potential conflicts. Funding came through a grant from the U.S. Department of Education. So, I mean, the whole point of reading that was to kind of bring the whole thing into context. My basic stance is SROs do not belong in schools whatsoever. And it's amazing that they can say things like, while SROs perform an important role in our nation's schools, that is completely unsubstantiated at all. This whole report just went over a whole bunch of reasons of why it's not good. It has made the problems worse that they began with. Cops do not belong in schools. The reason is that what policing is is the state-sanctioned use of violence to say either you will comply with what society says or we will kill you. And when you're saying that to a 12-year-old, I think you've already defined your morality level for everybody. But anyway, I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, maybe this. I'm Michael Wood Jr., police management expert, scholar, veteran, retired Baltimore police, and creator of civilian-led policing. I know it's not a comfortable discussion, but we got to talk about why these people with these white nationalist ideals are not the real enemy. See, there's a system in place, and we can argue about why this is. But in the end result, all the wealth in this country is being gathered in the increasing reaches of elite society, not the 1% or the 0.1%. It's getting to the 0.01%, the 0.001% owning all of the wealth in this country. A lot of this is rooted in a concept known as white supremacy. And I think it's kind of wrong to view it at that at this point in time, and maybe we should call it elite supremacy. Most members of the white community, most whites, are members of the oppressed classes themselves, and this is expressed by things right now as the level of poverty among whites, as the decreasing life expectancy of the white community. These members of society representing these white nationalist viewpoints at this point in time, but they really are losing. What they're becoming is they are now becoming and realizing that they're members of the oppressed classes as well. They are now seeing the effects of what everyone else has been knowing the whole time, of seeing the elite crush down on us. And this is a result of elite supremacy. We have to remember that. Part of this system of elite supremacy puts in multiple layers of classes and divisions to get us to fight against one another and maintain these classes. The most sinister of which, one of the most sinister methods within elite supremacy to fuel this division among the oppressed, is the allure of rising out of the oppressed classes by donning a uniform and a badge and becoming one of those enforcers of elite supremacy. The very first policing in America, the primary mission has been the creation and maintenance of oppressed classes, and then the extraction of wealth from those classes in order to fund their own oppression. And why is the number two thing: the protection of elite property over the lives of the oppressed classes. And along the way, that's required the third thing: to continue genocide of the Native American people. We get a decent income, and we get a world where the laws really don't apply to you either. There's no justice in our unjust system. Solutions will not come from within the construct of the system. It is not designed for solutions. It must be disrupted from the ground up. And we must recognize that justice does not equal revenge plus equality. It is not an eye for an eye. We must not be fighting to become the oppressors. We must fight to end oppression. It starts right now in your household, in your family, in your neighborhood. We're not each other's enemy. We're not. Okay, welcome back to Nuance's Science Stream. And we are going over now, next up, Ugh. Facebook live stream messed up. What is with that? All right, let's start the Facebook live stream again. I'll start that over. Oh, come on, Facebook. How you done this to us? Give me 1 second while I try to figure out Facebook. Or not. I guess Facebook's out of the game. So on Facebook, I will go ahead and put a new stream up in a minute. I'll just give a link to the YouTube page. But anyway, I guess we're still good on YouTube. All right, so welcome back to Nuance's Science Stream. Next article that we're going to go over is a 2017 article titled No Justice, No Peace, The Police, People of Color, and the Paradox of Protecting Human Rights by Rachel Wall in Human Rights Quarterly. This journal, Human Rights Quarterly, is widely recognized as the leader in the field of human rights. For more than a quarter century, Human Rights Quarterly has published articles for experts from around the world, writing for specialists and non-specialists alike. The Quarterly provides up-to-date information on important developments within the United Nations and regional human rights organizations, both governmental and non-governmental. It presents current work in human rights research and policy analysis, reviews of related books, and philosophical essays probing the fundamental nature of human rights as defined by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. HRQ has been nominated for the prestigious National Magazine Award for reporting. Sounds all good. But where is Human Rights Quarterly? Well, it's part of Johns Hopkins from my hometown of Baltimore. This place is a part of life in Baltimore. It's ubiquitous, Baltimore, and dominates politics and life in Baltimore, like in a way that only Amazon could dream. Baltimore is a place with a famous and infamous histories, and so does its little symbiote, Johns Hopkins. It's kind of like what they are. It's like Venom flying through with a alien taking over his skin and invading his brain, making him think that everything he's doing was his thoughts. It was really their thoughts. Hopkins is. Anyway, so considerable research to the benefit of humanity has come from Hopkins, though. Don't get me wrong. So, for some context, let's go over two examples. So, Ellen Roche, I'm not sure. Should have learned. A 24-year-old technician at the university's Asthma and Allergy Center had been ill since one day after she inhaled an experimental compound as part of a study to understand the cause of asthma. She died from lung cancer less than a month later. Hopkins gave a pseudo-admission to the experiment being the cause after Ms. Roche spent several weeks hospitalizing and suffering until her family called it. And the thing about Ms. Roche is, pay attention to that. The 24-year-old technician at the university's Asthma and Allergy Center, the employee, this is what they do to their friends. Mr. Roche was a healthy employee in that lab, sparking some ethical concerns and speaking to the culture in that organization. The most famous case of unethical practice, you would think that would be the most famous case. But anyway, the most famous case, or infamous would be more applicable, or of unethical practices came from the acquisition of HeLa cells, the oldest and most commonly used cell line in research. These special cells replicate indefinitely. Most people's cells are like analog tapes. For those that remember, anyway, it's a magnetized strip that a reader reads. These HeLa cells are like digital versions of cells. They're ready to hit Napster fresh off the bat and go out there and be replicated. So these cells have enabled profound medical breakthroughs, but the cells were taken from a patient named Henrietta Lacks without her knowledge or consent. During cancer surgery, Miss Lacks had cells removed without her permission, and those were then used in research revealing their uniqueness. Johns Hopkins University announced it will name a new research building on campus in honor of Henrietta Lacks, whose immortal cells led to the development of the polio vaccine, studies of leukemia and AIDS, chemotherapy, and in vitro fertilization research, as well as the effects of zero gravity in space. Quoting Johns Hopkins University President Ronald J. Daniels, quote, "This building will be a place that stands as an enduring and powerful testament to a woman who was not only the beloved mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother to generations of the Lacks family, but the genesis of generations of miraculous discoveries that have changed the landscape of modern medicine and that have benefited, in truth, the much larger family of humanity." At the end of this episode, I'll play a video produced by Hopkins on Henrietta Lacks. The abstract of this report, I'll go over here. And remember, everybody, this goes out on podcast too. So I know it seems weird. Sometimes I'm just reading something on the screen, but they don't have the screen. A new civil rights movement sweeping the United States has rallied around protecting the rights of people of color in the face of police violence. What is seldom recognized is how activist strategies can undermine each other. Activists who pressure the state for police accountability risk diminishing their efforts to build relationships with officers. Dialogues that cultivate relationships can sideline police accountability. Observations of forums between the police and communities, as well as interviews with both groups, reveal why efforts to improve police treatment of people of color are politically and ethically fraught, and how activists might mitigate these paradoxes. This article draws on fieldwork in a mid-sized southern city in the United States that was attempting to improve police relations with communities of color by holding a series of forums. I don't know what the city was, and I didn't think about it too hard. Probably New Orleans or something, but Jacksonville maybe. I don't know. So, but anyone that wants to check that out, it'd be interesting to figure out which. I mean, they try to mask it, but of course we could figure it out with inferences. The fieldwork consists of observation of these sessions and in-depth interviews with police officers and community members following each one. These interviews included 8 police officers and 24 members of the community. So right after this quick break, we'll go over that article. So stand by.
For the first time was a source of immense pride, but also a shocking reality to the complication of performing a duty under the weight of such power and responsibility.
As you can see,
the callousness of veterans cops and the braggadocious masculinity of the streets are immature expressions of the generations of trauma enacted on our brothers and sisters from a system oppressing us all. My internal fights with policing, whistleblowing, scholarly endeavors, reform efforts, and politics have failed in exhausting fashion.
And what I'm trying to say is that we are looking at people who are doing nothing new. And if we focus on the actions, then we can fix the things for next time. Because when you focus on people, we end up thinking we can chop the head off. They put a new person in, something will change. But if we don't focus on the methodologies and the institutions, then we will be totally missing.
Somebody, put them in a prison cell, do the paperwork, go back out and do it again. So what we really need is to change the incentives and disincentives so that no matter what the role, we're still going towards that objective that actually serves you.
More occupation, more vehicles, if your answer continues to be violent, because we have to understand that everything about policing is inherently violent. I have come in there with authority and told you what you will do.
I believe one of the reasons behind my struggles is that I had not laid out a consistent and intertwined philosophy of what in the hell I was trying to say. For the philosophical foundations of crime and punishment to be ushered into the 21st century, a reimagination of our institutions is necessary. Building off the famous works of Cesar Beccaria, I construct those pathways to the Enlightenment period of justice. Free will, sanctuary cities, gun control, eyewitness testimony, incarceration, and more must all work together for a prosperous society. Learning these lessons has been a brutal journey for me, and is unlikely to be an easy one for you, but it is one that we owe to the future, to make a safer world for our children to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century by yours truly, Michael Wood, is most conveniently ordered from the evil empire Amazon, because we are in that 21st century after all. For the enhanced and expanded audiobook, check out Audible. In the meantime, the philosophical half of Crime and Punishments, all 40-some chapters and then some, is being presented as a free podcast from iMember Media at imembermedia.com and will be available on all major platforms and direct from the publisher. Pause the video or see the links in the notes and prepare for the challenge and adventure of self-critical thought.
Welcome back. Anyone that has been paying attention to me talk over the last couple of years is well aware that I'm getting sick of identity politics and the usage of subjective and outright false terminology in our society. To make it worse, it saturates the scientific literature. So I'm going to highlight it when it comes up on this program. Here for video watchers, you will see where I've highlighted the article in red for these nonsense terms that help keep division and tribalism alive and damage the sciences. I do not understand how it even gets past an editor. I mean, how can you use these terms and not define them? They just say African Americans live in Black communities. Like that shit means anything. African Americans are first generation immigrants. After that, you're an American. Races are not real. The science knows this. So all you can say is that Black is a culture. Okay, fine. So now you're saying African Americans only like Black culture. Come on, that's hilarious. Africans from Africa despise American Blacks. The most racist thing I ever heard by a cop was an African American to a Black American. This is outright unscientific rhetoric that they use. The summary to our No Justice, No Peace article is another difficult one to summarize. I mean, say. I'm going to have to read the introduction, methods, and settings verbatim. I just don't have the skills to make it more concise and contextualize it. So again, remember this is a podcast as well, so we must expand a little bit beyond our videos. It's just hard to do, sitting here in front of a computer screen like a weirdo. Anyway. No justice, no peace. The police, people of color, and the paradox of protecting human rights. The chant of no justice, no peace echoes through Black Lives Matter protests. It seems especially appropriate for this movement, which has organized in response to police killings of unarmed people of color. Unlike when people gather to protest U.S. involvement in distant wars, many people of color are themselves embattled, fearing for their lives and those of their children and grandchildren. Classical liberal theorists such as John Locke saw the legitimacy of the state as based on its ability to uphold the security of its citizens. If the state fails to uphold its end of the contract, then citizens are released from theirs. Revolution might even be justified if the state preys on its citizens. At the very least, police violence seems to call for efforts to hold the state accountable through protest and lawsuits. There is, however, another means of attempting to change the state. This is reflected in the dialogues, picnics, and town hall meetings that are also occurring between police and communities of color across the United States. These aim not only to give the community a voice in how to improve community relations, police community relations, but also to improve that relationship directly by bringing these groups into contact. Hence, the President's report on 21st century policing recommended that officers meet the community through positive non-enforcement activities, and the Department of Justice Community Relations Service has provided support to police departments willing to do so. What is rarely examined is how police officers respond to the pressure of activists or to efforts to build relationships between officers and the community. Investigating these questions leads to a troubling conclusion. These two strategies, while both integral to human rights efforts, can undermine each other. The paradox hides in plain sight in the cry of no justice, no peace. Until justice is attained, protesters warn there can be no peace. But this is precisely peace, or at least the suspension of suspicion, that cultivates relationships and the kind of dialogues that are occurring between some police departments and communities. Conversely, the willingness to attempt to understand the perspective of state officials through dialogue has the potential to weaken the pressure that may have motivated those officials to hold dialogues in the first place. The intended consequences of the means of improving police interactions with oppressed communities, and specifically the way in which those two primary methods of this effort can hinder each other, helps to explain why the problem has seemed so intractable. The side note, real quick, is that there are no oppressed communities. We can articulate methods of improvement, but what we're talking about, vast majority of this, I won't say no, we might be able to find some, but the vast majority of what we're talking about is the remnants, the echoes of oppressed communities and how that still transcends. We're always missing that. We get caught up in the histrionics. That's why people are bringing up stuff from the 40s and 50s. It's not relevant today. It's just, it's explanation, not justification. Methods and setting. This article draws on field work in a mid-sized southern city in the United States that was attempting to improve police relations with communities of color by holding a series of forums. The field work consists of observations of these sessions and in-depth interviews with police officers and community members following each one. These interviews included 8 police officers and 24 members of the community. 3 forums occurred in the midst of widespread public outrage over the deaths of unarmed people of color at the hands of police. They took place in May and September of 2015 and February 2016, prior to the assassinations of police officers in Dallas and Baton Rouge, but after tensions had already exploded in response to police killings, such as those of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, and Freddie Gray. Hoping to proactively prevent such tragedies and the unrest that follows, the police chief in this city contacted the Department of Justice Community Relations Service for support. Local and national officials worked together to structure the dialogues based on the pillars of the recently released final report on the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which is trash. Invitees of the first forum will target it from the specific sectors, including people affiliated with organizations related to religion, education, civil rights, housing, and youth. That's, lost myself. As well as other city officials. The second forum was open to the public. Many, but not all, community participants were African American. I bet hardly no African Americans were there, but there were lots of Black Americans. Anyway, the third forum was specifically for the Latino community. So here we're talking about 3 different forums. Amazingly, think about what they're doing here. One forum is for organizations, and the example is pastors. I mean, I don't understand why policing are constantly embedded with religion. Education, teachers, and civil rights representatives, housing, youth, all of those groups seem to make sense, but to delineate them as these separate groups, like, baffling. These are all people of your citizenry. I mean, did you have a meeting and you said, oh, well, this meeting is only for the Latino community and we're trying to address our racism by saying something incredibly racist? Anyway, the city in question is a southern state with a long history of racist policies and practices that apparently continue in a blind, naive fashion that you don't see in the exact opposite manner. There are many decades of injustice and both anger and distrust that stem from it. The police dialogues are only one way that the city has attempted to address this situation. It has also sponsored other dialogues, such as those that focus on different facets of race in the city. So you spent time focusing on something that wasn't real, as well as the commission, the collection, and reporting of data on police stops of use. So you paid 4 cops to tell you their version of events. And partially as a result, the city recently amended its policies on youth stops and arranged for officers to be trained in how to better understand adolescent behavior and de-escalate encounters with them. That's completely going to be unconnected and not work. I mean, you have a racist division and segregation within your forums. And then everything you do is stuff we know doesn't work and doesn't make any sense. Amazing. Still, many local residents feel that these changes are not enough. Shocker. Some argue that the city has stopped short of measures that would provide the public with the means to hold police accountable. No police can be held accountable. In this country, there is no system for it. For example, a police advisory board has been convened and meets publicly, but it won't have teeth, of course. However, the police chief, in consultation with city officials, appoints its members. Yes, so they're just lackeys, which some residents feel diminishes the board's independence. I mean, this isn't a feel issue. How can you? It's amazing how they can say that. They just feel this way. They're completely dependent upon the approval of the police chief and city officials. They have no possibility to be independent. Moreover, the police willingly collected data of their stops on youth of color for the aforementioned report. And remember, this is true throughout. I mean, even FBI stats are just what the police willingly collected and told you. It's their version of events solely. But when the community activists requested narrative data detailing each stop, the police refused. Of course. Represented by an attorney from the ACLU, the local NAACP and Public Housing Board sued the police for the release of this data. The judge decided in the favor of the police. Hence, this city is an ambivalent context for the improvement of police community relations, with strong efforts on the part of the police to improve the environment, but many in the community feeling these efforts are insufficient. We're going to get to it all the time. Discussing the solution isn't the point of this podcast, but if you do not connect the people with the authority over the police, you're going to be constantly missing the base. Police work for mayors and for governors and for executives in the federal government. They don't work for you. None of them do. They work for power. It's created by power to work for power. Of note here in the next part, in the terms of political theory, Black Lives Matter protests and town hall meetings reflected the distinction between agonistic and deliberative approaches to politics. Agonism, here we go, refers to the confrontational approaches to political change wherein competing forces pressure each other or the state. I guess I would have thought that was antagonism, but anyway. Agonism. So yeah, you have one side that want to do the protests, and then you have the other side that wants to compete through the force. So it's through the typical measures. So you have the authoritarian side, which says, no, you're going to do this, or we're going to do, or else. And you have the pragmatic side that tries to negotiate. We know the left does not negotiate. So you get locked into a situation with no end. Like later on in the report, I'm just going to go through little highlights in the report. We get the idea. They met with everybody, and there's just no way this is going to connect anything. You're holding these groups that you've already segregated, and one of the main problems is we're supposed to be looking for solutions. So this is like asking. I know it seems good. You need to gather information, but you're gathering information to their perspective of the citizenry. You can't actually be taking it as expertise as to what you should do. It's a matter of where you should be going, the direction. Otherwise, you are essentially asking people who have been the victims of a car crash to be the one to explain to you how the physics of car crashes work, because they were subjected to it, that somehow they know the inner workings of how this took place. It makes absolutely no sense, but we can't have conversations to do it. Like theorists, many activists concerned about police violence combine agonistic and deliberative approaches. They may attend protests and town halls, support lawsuits, as well as community policing initiatives. I found this very much the case in Baltimore, Portland, Austin, LA, all the places we went to and talked to everybody. Very much the case that people want to do both sides, but they strongly believe in one side versus the other. And then you have your fringe groups that believe the pragmatic side is absolutely insane. Then you have the pragmatist that thinks the people trying to push the cultural or the public narrative are also insane. And they support lawsuits, and the lawsuits baffle me. So the lawsuit idea is, remember, the money from your government comes from the people. So you're going to go and sue yourselves to fix something that you're not in control of. It makes absolutely no sense. It drives me crazy that it was accepted that DeRay McKesson left Baltimore, went down to, what was it, Baton Rouge or New Orleans or wherever that was, which is probably one of these. It's going to be one of these things, probably New Orleans or Baton Rouge, and they sued those people. So he goes down there, gets arrested, makes a big stink of media, sues, gets paid, does nothing for that neighborhood. Just go in there. It's just another version of exploiting Black pain and suffering of communities. It's nothing but violence, porn, and profiting and grifting. It's fucking disgusting that people allow this. Don't say anything. But anyway. In spite of the tensions in this U.S. city and throughout the nation, the majority of the police and community members who attended the dialogue to express a strong and consistent desire to build positive relationships with one another. Another common misperception you're going to see with the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to tell you that Black people want something different. It's absolutely not true. It's Black people that call 911. It's Black communities that hire Black cops, Black cities, Black people, Black culture doing all of these things. And they want to come together and find a way to work with the police. They're the ones calling them and funding them and living with them every single day. They're not trying out there to go have a war. Just simply not true. As we go through, you're going to keep seeing as all these terms highlighted in red: white police officer, African American man, people of color. I mean, do we have any evidence that white police officers behave any differently than Black police officers? Nope, we don't. And the evidence that we do have that says Black police officers are any different says that they are more likely to use incidences of forces. And I believe this is because all crime, all violence is not all, but 80% for white, 90% for Black. The crime, usually when you commit crime, it's with the things that you're familiar with. So you would be more comfortable in that thing. And I think a lot of Black cops are embarrassed by the Black suspect they feel as though it's making them look bad. So it makes them more aggressive. I thought I might have done that with white people. I mean, who knows? White male, people of color, men. I mean, they sit here and constantly use male and men like they're interchangeable terms. One is a gender, one is a sex. They're not interchangeable terms. Female African American police officer. If we expect officers to behave a certain way, why does it matter to play identity politics with them? It's absolutely baffling. A lot of these officers go down it, and I mean, they see this. I'm a little impressed with the officer that they're interviewing in here, this one. So officers react similarly to protests, viewing them as widening the gulf between the police and the community. Obviously, in retrospect, this has clearly been true. It helped the belief, and it was true that it divided it. And I think that's going to reverse rather soon. It has already started reversing. But Officer Johnson criticized protesters on both sides of the issues, insisting, and this is his quote, "It's the whole Black Lives Matter and people shouting all lives matter. It's divisive. You take an 18-year-old kid who is growing up in the suburbs somewhere, and everyone's telling him he's bad because he's white and he doesn't get it. People resent that. On the same token, if you're a Black kid living in the city and you get stopped every time you're on your way home from school, well, that breeds resentment also. The rhetoric on all sides needs to just calm down. I think that's the biggest problem. Every special interest group tends to stoke the flames." look at Officer Johnson here. I mean, this is a very good observation that's astute that I think the vast majority of people will not see because they're not in both sides, so to say. One advantage of being a police living out and not with where you live, which I don't think cops should police where they live. It sounds right for corruption to me. But it gives you a broader idea and diverse perspective on what's going on. Act like we're not all Americans in America. White male, Black male, female African American. So here we go. And another one, here we have Officer Smith, who is, they got to point out, is the female African American officer. This is a real movement from the community to go back to the community policing model that was in place about 30 years ago when people were walking the beat and knew the neighborhoods and knew the people. It was all about wanting relationships. People police wanting relationships with community and community wanting relationships with police. Now, this is a very typical repeating, and I'm going to say I doubt that this officer has been in other communities outside of Black community, because this is largely the Black community's position. But this whole community policing model, this is not what like rednecks want or anything. That's crazy. Or libertarians. We don't want the cops around us. We don't want the police going through our neighborhoods and getting to know us. We want police away from us, and that's the most American thing you could possibly do, is want the police away from you. People have been falsely led to believe that community policing was safer and better. It's just not true. You just didn't hear about it. Violence, even police violence, is dramatically down, has been going down for a long time, and will continue to go down. So this is a complete misperception, and a very good idea of where I'm telling you where these crash victims essentially think they understand the physics of what's going on, and they have no idea. The push for community policing led to me being walking foot in neighborhoods for 6 months in Sandtown, Winchester, right where Freddie Gray was killed, and just locking up people for drugs left and right, not helping anybody, because they just put us down there to foot, and they think that foot or talking to people is going to help. It's like, it's not. If you have an adversarial position, the intimacy of your adversary is I don't know if that's better. And as we pointed out before, the third forum that was held in the Latino community, no Blacks allowed, brown only, no whites, brown only. Many of the attendees were undocumented immigrants. It's a whole another fucking issue. But anyway, police responses to this third forum with the Latino community were considerably more positive. Without having to face the direct criticism and demands of citizens making claims against the state, the officers felt moved by compassion. I largely don't know what moved by compassion means, but for some reason, I would say that this right here is the soft bigotry of low expectations coming from the police culture. Largely, if you think about it, most police departments, so where I worked, Baltimore was a majority Black police department. And most police departments do somewhat closely reflect their communities. It would be baffling if they didn't. So these the officers with hardly any Latino members in the policing, the officers, the Black and white, they see a kind of division, but they're Americans. The white officers expect the Black officers to be peers, and the Black officers expect the white officers to be peers. But these Latino people, well, I guess they're lesser than us. They can't perform like us, so we're going to be compassionate to them because they can't. They're just not as good as us and not as advantaged as we are. That would be my guess. So I think all this is crazy. Going into these meetings and talking about stuff that isn't about solutions. One big mistake that I'm always talking about is that the Black Lives Matter movement in concept, and why I was part of explaining these issues, is not as a justification, but as an explanation. This is why the things are where they are at their current state. It doesn't mean that they are the way they were in the past that got them to where they are. So everything we need to be talking about with oppression and racism and stuff like that in the system is largely talking about those ripple effects. But anyway, Black people of color, black, women, white neighborhood, black neighborhood, white neighborhood, black neighborhood, white neighborhood, black neighborhood, people of color, changing white people's perceptions. I'm blue, I'm Black, I'm male, I'm woman, I'm this. Until they start saying American, we're just never going to get past this. Another highlight. Officer Johnson's admission that the police have a bias against young Black males exemplifies this struggle. At some moments, he defended his comment as statistically justifiable. At other times, he insisted that the bias is more closely tied to socioeconomic class or how people dress and present themselves. He also conceded, though, that a good police officer suspends such assumptions not only to guarantee equal rights, but also to avoid being killed by the people to whom he has given the benefit of the doubt. Bunch of issues there. So this is very typical, but he is statistically justified. I mean, yes, I constantly say we don't have any evidence of who actually commits crimes other than murder. Murder is the one crime that we have pretty accurate statistics for. And if you're going to use that to kind of translate it down to other acts of violence, yeah, of course, black males are vastly more violent than other people. The question is why? It's not because they're black. Crazy. I mean, it has an influence of being young and being male as an influence, yes, but the black isn't. It's racism real. It doesn't cause anything to happen. So he says tied to more socioeconomic class, now people dress and present themselves. This is true, but socioeconomic lower classes are going to commit more crimes. This is absolutely right. I mean, how you present themselves is an indicator. It is it is communication. I mean, it's just going to be human nature in the way it always is. But he thought that a good police officer suspends these things, which I've talked about before as well. And I think this was my error with suspending a lot of these things. It's that you understand them. It's not that you suspend them. You don't become blinded. You what is in scholarship would be bracketing. You set up parameters and a mentality that you don't act upon that prejudice. But there's nothing wrong with that prejudice existing. And when he says that people will avoid being killed, so that's the mindset. That's why I talk about implicit bias training and how it's very dangerous, because the cop doesn't come away saying he should be giving the benefit of the doubt to more people. He comes away saying he should give the benefit of the doubt to less people, increasing that school to prison pipeline we were talking about before in the previous episode. It can exacerbate situations like that. So here's another example. Scholarship just doesn't have any clue what it's talking about when it comes to policing, but I do want everybody to see where it is. And some of the things that we're talking about that are cited that are true, but you see, most of these things that they're talking about, they're subjective. That's why it doesn't have a citation. So I just don't understand why a reviewer isn't like, you got to cite that. Where are you getting this from? One reason the tension between the police and marginalized communities can seem so intractable is because the means to remedy the situation also worsen it. Agonistic approaches such as lawsuits and protests may be crucial in order to persuade state officials that it is worthwhile to adopt reforms that constrain and share power, such as robust civilian review boards and the release on the data of police stops. I understand this is a conclusion, but understand this is purely somebody's opinion, and this person is completely uninformed and has no experience in the actual policing or in these environments of what is going on. I understand that it's very good for making yourself objective, but in qualitative work, you must understand the context, and they just have no ability to conceptualize this full context from most of what I see. It's a human issue, but still an issue. So anyway, sunlight. Methods such as lawsuits and protests, however, can undermine the potential to build positive relationships between the police and community, and they make the police more defensive and reactive. Those things are true, but these are all feelings. These are all how they feel. We don't have any evidence that the police get more defensive and reactive in their actions. Maybe they say that, but there's not any evidence that this thing's changed because of this. And which is why none of this is being cited right here. They're not giving a link to actual data. They're just purely speculating what these things do. So where it says agonistic approaches such as lawsuits and protests may be crucial in order to persuade state officials. How do you have any evidence that it would persuade state officials? Why do they care that you lose a lawsuit given the money that you already took from the citizens back to one citizen of your area? It doesn't come out of their pockets. There's no desire to care. It doesn't make any sense. The importance of both pressure and dialogue is reflected in the assertion by political theorists that contestatory speech should be central to deliberation, and that deliberators should have recourse to agonistic action should deliberation fail to achieve a community's aims. Such theory is premised on the assumption, though, that these models of change can be combined without negatively affecting each other. However, engaging in confrontational or critical speech in deliberation is likely to alter its outcome. Right, so this is the whole qualitative thing too. Why, like, one reason why the researcher doesn't know anything, he's not in the environment, doesn't understand, isn't part of what's going on. And this is kind of the same thing that can happen if you argue and you get divisive. Then that familiarity is going to tribalize you and break you out. If you have these ideas that it's Black and it's Latino and it's this and that, police and citizen, these are not separate. We are all Americans, and then our involvement in the situation will be productive. If what you're there to do is alter, is make things confrontational, regardless of your intent, you're going to make power put up their defenses as they are just humans, and of course you're not going to get anywhere. This points to two conclusions. First, it is important for both police and activists to accept that their efforts, no matter how crucial or well-intentioned, are likely to generate unintended consequences. My main fight with the resistance movement at the founding of that, and with Black Lives Matter, I kept trying to say, you got to be working towards the outcomes you want, not just the policies that make you feel good, because these policies are going to have these consequences that you don't understand. So you have to take a more scientific approach. You got to talk to people that are involved. You got to have discussions. They don't want to do that. Second, police and activists alike can be intentional in determining which strategies are worth which undesirable consequences depending on the context and their aims. And another problem we have here is neither police nor activists understand the systems that they are trying to change. Police and activists would need to be trained in what procedures get the best outcomes for them, but how to get there. Like, people just can't do this. You can't learn all this stuff. We're in a specialist society. Many organizations, no doubt, make careful decisions about which actions are most strategic and beneficial, but it may bolster their efforts to explicitly and routinely consider which negative consequences are worth enduring for which reasons, as well as negative pushback from an initiative might be mitigated. No doubt make careful decisions. I mean, there's no evidence of that either. Another thing that's uncited, which actions are most strategic and most beneficial. Nothing has happened over the last 2 or 3 years or anything since they've said this. Literally nothing. No laws, no policy changes. Nothing happened. Nothing was done. So what strategic and beneficial outcomes are they even aiming for? I just don't get it at all. I think largely these people are just confused clearly, and they're not seeing the reality in front of them. Somewhere around 100 of those highlighted misleading and unscientifically used terms has a lot to do with it. All of this division betrays the reality of the situation. The police and the people are not two different groups. The police are a subservient group. We are supposed to be lesser than servants. Cops are told what to do. We serve the public. The honest discussion is around the system of policing and how to get the desired outcomes. For example, there's a discussion about Black cops as nonsensical. I harpened to before. The idea that the Black Lives Matter movement, and I got arguments with them constantly about this behind the scenes, was wanting more Black cops and more minorities to put on the uniform and do it when we have no evidence that that's going to be more beneficial. A Black cop and a white cop are not a thing. Again, race is not real. These are people doing a job, human beings, Americans, and you get 99.999% the exact same responses out of human beings in any situation. But a white guy in the hood, same circumstances, going to deal with the same problems. Sorry, it's just the way it is. If anybody wants to debate that, you know where to get a hold of me, but you won't. So next, after this, let's check out that Henrietta Lacks video. And I think I'm going to bounce out of here for now. This went well. I lost my Facebook feed, and then I will go over this. But during this video, I'll check and see if there are any messages that I need to answer right away. Otherwise, I'll answer questions at a later broadcast where I can put them all together, just like this. So I did 2 here, and I'll try to keep doing this more. Thanks, and check out this Henrietta Lacks video. The next episode that we're going to discuss is on deaths in police custody, but I'll probably do that tomorrow or some other time, since it's went pretty well, I think. We'll see. Probably talking too soon, aren't I? I had a total mess, and you're like, what are you talking about? But all right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Meet the Blinkist app. Discover the key ideas from the world's best nonfiction books. Listen in 15 minutes. Or read on your favorite device. Browse through themed book lists curated by industry experts and get titles specifically chosen for you based on your interests. Store your reads in your personal library to keep track of what you learn. Meet the Blinkist app, the world's knowledge in the palm of your hand.
At the center of the Henrietta Lacks story are people asking questions. For people trying to understand the biology of human cells, it's there. For bioethicists, for patients. This is why Johns Hopkins is committed to outreach and education for all the community.
It's a labor of love. We all feel like we're connected to this beautiful woman who we call the mother of medicine. It really makes you think about how powerful an impact one person unknowingly could make.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming to learn more about my great-grandmother and what her legacy has left for all of us here today. So over 60 years ago,
in my capacity as the director of outreach for the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research, I organize educational programs related to Henrietta Lacks. And the main focus is to increase awareness of Henrietta Lacks's impact on medicine and society, to gain a better understanding of the science behind HeLa cells, and also to create an open dialogue about the social issues that were occurring around the time in which Henrietta Lacks's cells were cultured.
I would say that Henrietta is probably, if not the most important, certainly one of the most important women in science and medicine. And we all learn and follow Henrietta Lacks' legacy as we contribute to research and medicine.
Henrietta Lacks was a 31-year-old woman admitted to Johns Hopkins in 1951 for the diagnosis and treatment of cervical cancer. Unfortunately, she had a very aggressive cancer, and within a year, she had died. As part of the care she received at Johns Hopkins, the cells from her cervix were brought into a laboratory and cultured, and have become the first human living cell line, which has allowed us to learn remarkable things about how human cells function.
It was really, in my opinion, the launch pad, probably the greatest discovery in biomedical research in the last half of the 20th century. It has led to numerous discoveries and development of technologies.
It provided the ability for us to understand how cells grow, how cells divide, whether cells can survive in extreme climates, going into outer space, how radiation damages cells, how we can produce lots of material to make things like vaccines, which is all part of what the HeLa cell has done for science and for the public.
Just the fact that, 65 years later, a sample of our grandmother's cells still exists out in the world today is almost superhuman.
Our responsibility is to honor the legacy of Henrietta, to thank her family and thank her posthumously each year, which is what we do. We have a Henrietta Lacks Memorial Lecture. I think last year we had 1,000 people attend. Each year we organize the Henrietta Lacks High School Symposium. We've partnered with the Henrietta Lacks Legacy Group, the Turner Station Conservation Teams, and other groups to form a book club that builds a bridge for people who live in this community and Hopkins researchers to get together and really talk about issues. We also have the Microscope Day, in which we open up the laboratory of one of our colleagues, Jim Potter. They learn about the significance of her cells. The Johns Hopkins Urban Health Institute offers a $15,000 partnership grant to community-based organizations that partner with Johns Hopkins researchers to address health challenges that are impacting people who live in Baltimore. We also partner with Dunbar High School to offer the Henrietta Lacks Scholarship for individuals who are interested in pursuing careers in medicine. And that is really, to us, one of the ultimate ways of honoring Henrietta Lacks is to increase the prevalence of individuals working in medicine who understand the unique challenges of the community.
This scholarship is way more than just academics. Is me being a part of a legacy. It shows you that Henrietta Lacks herself did more than help cure diseases. Her sacrifice, it has given teenagers like me an opportunity to excel in their future.
Students are the next generation. They're the next generation of doctors, researchers, scientists. So to get them exposed to the story of Henrietta Lacks and see the mistakes that were made and how we are moving forward, possibilities of endless.
What was most interesting to me was what the providers were saying.
Collaboration between the community and academics is what medicine is supposed to be. We're not supposed to be an ivory tower. We are supposed to be working with the people we serve. And by reaching out to the community, we better understand them, their needs, and they understand what it takes for us.
At some point in some time in life, everybody's going to get sick. Everybody's going to suffer for some type of disease, some type of cancer, some type of dementia, any type of thing. So we need research to, find cures, find medication, find some kind of prevention. So I think it's very important research, and I think, we need to do our part to get involved.
So again, I want to say thank you for helping us honor my great-grandmother Henrietta Lacks.
Henrietta passed away, but yet she still lives on, and she's making a huge impact on society today.
I know, but it's true. Your contributions are needed to continue our work. The two preferred ways are through our Alpha Tribe BitChute page at bitchute.com/channel/Alpha Tribe and directly through our PayPal account at paypal.me/iMemberMedia. But the absolute best way is to go to your local university, college, or similar, refer them to imembermedia.com/public speaking, and make the case to bring me out and discuss these issues in person. And additionally, everyone says it because it cannot be underestimated how important it is to like, love, share, and subscribe to as much as you can. So please follow on iMemberMedia's Facebook page, facebook.com/iMemberMediaLLC, iMemberMedia's magazine on medium.com/iMember-Times, and iMemberMedia's Twitter at iMemberMedia. The Alpha Tribe BitChute page, which we said earlier, and the Gab account at Alpha Tribe, and find our podcast version so you can have a listen on Podbean, Audible, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. And then look me up on Instagram, LinkedIn, Medium, Minds, Goodreads, and YouTube, Michael Wood Jr. Links are in the bio where applicable, but you can always head on over to our publisher's page at imembermedia.com for everything and then some. The most beautiful thing about life is every one of our interactions changes who we are. Not only are we capable of changing others, we unavoidably do. Talk, grow, challenge ideas, find the nuance.